Hey, Cobalt here. This is going to be my next tutorial, and it's going to be on animation elements are the basic fundamental building blocks of animation. Now, these are the things that you need to learn now, and you can improve them and get better at it throughout your animation career. And let's start with the most basic one, easing. Now, easing is something that's very important, and you should probably learn it first because it really helps make your animations look good. Now, easing is basically the principle of acceleration and how you're going to use it in your animations. Now, right here, I quickly threw together a little example with the ball dropping. And basically, I use this to show you these would each be a frame of your animation, and they will show that when your ball first starts to fall, it only accelerates a little bit. It only gets slightly moves forward, but then it moves a little more forward than the last time. And see, with each frame it should accelerate slightly more than the last frame, and it'll continue accelerating until it reaches its fastest acceleration or it hits something. And another example is the acceleration of a car. When you first start driving a car, you can't just hit the gas pedal and immediately be driving at 60 unless you have some kind of amazing car. It should take a little time to accelerate. Now, it'll start off accelerating slowly until it reaches its regular speed, whatever speed you want to go at. And then, say that the speed you're moving at is 60 and you want to slow down. And whenever you're slowing down back to 0 so that you can stop, it's going to slow down slightly. It's not going to be sudden unless you just slam on the brakes. Now, this principle is just an easy way to show what you're going to be using in animation, because you're going to start off slowly and then you're going to build up on that, and then when you want to stop an action, you're going to slow it down, the acceleration rate. Now, the middle point, the fastest point, is normally going to be whatever action you're performing. If you're performing a serious action that requires a large movement, like a punch or something like that you would use in a stick figure animation, you'll start his arm moving slowly at first, and then when you get to this fastest action, it'll be the biggest difference, and then you're going to slowly decelerate from that point. Okay? Another example I have right here is, say, a stick figure's head. If he's taking a quick movement forward, say a punch or a kick or whatever, or just jumping forward a little, he'll start off accelerating slowly, and then whenever he performs that action, he'll start decelerating from it. Or he may use the momentum from that action to continue his slightly either the same speed or a slightly lower speed into his next action. That's a little more complicated, but for basic easing, you just need to know that it starts off slowly, gets to a certain point, whatever your action is, and then it decelerates from that point. Now here's some bad examples. You don't want your easing to be too constant. I used to have a pretty big problem with this, where I would just make my movement be basically the same rate every single frame, and you can pull off if the rate that it's moving is kind of small. You can make your animations look decent, but if you want them to really look smooth and flowing, then you're going to want to probably try to use more easing with the acceleration and deceleration principle. Another one is too sporadic, like you have a big action, then you start to slow down, and then you just increase it again and you slow down, and it's all messed up looking. It won't look good, period. So this is the basic principle of easing. Now let's move on to the next principle, double framing. Now whenever you're making an animation and you're easing, there are some movements that just look too fast, and rather than add another frame, and it might still not get by as clear as what you're trying to show, because you want that maybe one frame to be shown for more than just a single frame, then you can double frame it. Now, I know that was kind of a jumbled explanation, but let me show you. Say that you're building up for a punch, and he has his arm raised like this, and then he punches. Well, when you play your animation, it may go too fast. He may just have his arm up in the air for like too small to even tell, and then just punch. Now, you may want it to have more anticipation, which is another one we're going to cover soon. You may want it to be clear what he's doing right before he punches, so you may want to double frame that action. what you would do for that is just to copy that frame. Just have two of the frames, and then the action will be a little clearer when it happens. When the punch happens, you'll be able to see clearly that his arm was raised in the air. Now, obviously, for double framing, if your frames per second are higher, if there are more frames that are playing per second, you're going to want to increase your double framing, maybe even triple framing, and I'm not sure if anyone does this. I think I've heard of it once or twice, quadruple framing. It's pretty intense. So that's just the basic of double framing, and let's move on. Now our next principle is movement. Now for movements, this is just basically how clear your movements are. Now if, say I want this stick figure right here, I want him to just wave his arm. Well, I don't want it to look all spazzy like he's having a seizure. I want my audience to be able to tell what's happening, what kind of movement he's making, what he's doing, and what's going on. So instead of making it look spazzy, you're going to want it to be clear. Now, movements, this is just a basic example of movement, but it's also what frames you use to show what's happening. Like, if I want a stick figure to do a spin kick, now this is a pretty advanced move, and a lot of people who are new to animation probably wouldn't be able to pull it off right away. They would try it, and they would do some kind of kick, and then when they go to their next frame, they may just make his leg like that or something like that, but then when they play it, it doesn't look like he's doing a spin kick. It looks like he's kicking and then he's immediately into a running stance or some sort of thing, and it's just not clear. Now this is where movements come in, and this is something that you'll acquire over time. Some people are just better at it than others, but you can practice and you can learn what kind of movements you need to make something clear. And a lot of things you're not really going to know what movement you need when you first try it. Like if you first try a new move or something, you may have to do multiple things before you figure out what kind of frames you need to make it clear what you're doing. Now flow is another important part, and you may have noticed by now, but a lot of these concepts connect with each other. So you need to learn them all and be able to use them all like simultaneously without having to think about it. That comes through practice. Now flow, basically this principle that all things are kind of in a smooth movement, kind of in a circular movement if you want it to look good, like a curving line. Now I've shown this with a simple smooth curving line and then like heads of a stick figure, but a good way to really show it is to just play an animation. Now this is just a little combo I made earlier, and you may notice, but in life, whenever you're doing movements, it's not really sporadic. It's kind of a flow whenever you change through a movement, and this principle also stays with animation. So let's start a little dot here on his head, and let's just kind of increase this dot as we play the animation to show where it's moving. As you can see, there's already a sort of flow going on with his head, the way it's moving. It's not sporadic movements. It's smooth, flowing. You can see it's kind of like a curving line. Now, you're going to want to use this principle. You're going to want to add it to all your animations and all movements you do, because it'll make them they'll have flow, and it's a really hard principle to explain with words, but when you watch an animation that has flow and when you watch one that doesn't, you'll see the difference. You'll see how if you have a sporadic movement, say you want to do a kick and you want your stick figure to lean back in the kick, you're not just going to go like that all of a sudden. You're not going to do that. You're going to want to show frames that show his head moving from this point to this point in a curving line with flow, and you're not going to want his head to go here in the middle of that. That would ruin it. That would not only be bad movement, but that would ruin the flow in your animation. So flow is something that you're going to really want to try to just incorporate. Say if you're playing your animation and it just looks like it's missing something, it looks kind of hard to tell what's going on. It could be a variety of things like your movements, or if you're not easing properly, or double framing. But really, flow is just kind of an advanced concept that you want to try to incorporate. And yeah, so let's move on to the next one, anticipation. Anticipation is the build-up before an action. Now, this is likened to the frames right before you have your action. All the frames there, that's your build-up to your action. Okay? So, as an example, it also connects with double framing in that if you have an action and you can't tell if it's too fast or something, you may need more anticipation, so you may need to double frame these frames before the action. See? They all are connected. And so for this, I showed you some examples. Say a stick figure is about to kick. This is the frame right before he kicks. This is the main point of anticipation before that kick. Because whenever you're doing an action, you want your audience to kind of have an idea what's going to happen before the person does it. Unless it's a really strange or complicated move, you want them to be able to tell, like, oh, he's about to punch, he's building up for a punch. Or even after, say, like, oh, okay, now I see why he was doing that before the punch. I can tell that he was building up for it. You see? And this is just like a punch here. This is the frame of highest anticipation right. Sorry about that. This is going to be your highest point of anticipation right before the punch. And so you're going to want to make sure that your audience can tell, okay, he's building up for a punch. And another example, it doesn't just have to be for fighting moves. It can be for anything like jumping. This is going to be your highest point of anticipation. Right here, when his arms are swung back, he's kneeled down, he's ready to jump, and your audience can tell. And even if this may be not your highest, maybe this is kind of part of the action. But yeah, so you just want to make sure that your anticipation before you have the actual action of jumping or whatever it is, you want to make sure that your audience can tell. It's just the build up before an action, and if it's not clear enough, you can double frame. So, let's move on. Smooth versus choppy. Okay, for this one, a lot of people get confused with smooth. They think smooth is the exact same as our first one, easing, but it's not. Smooth and choppy is basically a connection of everything that we have learned. It's just making your animations, what's happening in them, clear. It's just like movements and easing and everything that I've taught you so far in this tutorial. It's all about building up so that your animation can be smooth and not choppy, so that your audience can tell what's going on, so that it looks well eased, your movements are down, you have correct anticipation before your actions, and you make sure that you have flow. Now, a good way to explain this is, say an animation may not be perfectly eased. The easing is kind of off. Maybe the easing is sporadic in some places, not too badly though, or it's too much of the same, not enough acceleration or deceleration. If you can tell what's happening in that animation, you can comment that the easing may be a little off, it may need to be more eased, but necessarily if you can see what's happening and tell, it's not choppy necessarily. It doesn't have to be choppy. It could still be smooth, just maybe not as smooth as someone else's that has better easing. And so yeah, just see if it's clear or not. If it's clear, then you know that they've got it down, and if it's not, if it's amazingly clear, then you know that they've pretty much mastered all the different elements. But make sure to separate these categories, because if someone's animation is lacking just one of these, don't just say that it's choppy, explain which one it's lacking. Say it's lacking its easing, or its movements, they're not clear enough. Like, he's eased it properly, but he's eased strange movements that you can't tell what's happening as well. And yeah, that just basically connects everything. All these animation principles, I've probably explained this, but they all just go around in a circle of animation. It's all connected. So yeah, I hope you learned something, and I hope you check out my other videos. Thank you.